Intersections, conversations. Frustrated, angered, confused, or just plain tired of the polarizing conversations about race? Not sure what to say, what to think, or even what to do? Well, you've come to the right place. As we move beyond the rhetoric to look for solutions that reduce health disparities and create better working environments. As my grandmother would say, it has to come up to come out. Welcome to our Intersections Conversations, where diversity, equity, and inclusion meet.
Okay, so today we're going to dive into some fascinating human behavior. We're talking Islamophobia and the bystander effect. You sent us some really thought-provoking material on this. It's got my brain buzzing.
Yeah, it's one thing to read about these issues, but you've given us a chance to really dissect them and understand the why behind the reactions and think about what that means for us in our everyday lives.
Exactly. You've included this 2008 ABC News article and YouTube video, same name, What Would You Do? Muslim. They set up this social experiment in a Texas bakery using actors to stage Islamophobic discrimination.
And the footage they captured is incredible. It wasn't about interviewing people about their beliefs. It was about putting them in a situation charged with prejudice and seeing how they'd react in real time.
So let's set the scene for our listeners. What exactly went down in this bakery?
Okay, so imagine this. A Muslim woman wearing a hijab walks into a bakery. Everything seems normal at first. But when it's her turn to order, the bakery clerk hits her with this wave of verbal abuse, refusing to serve her just because of her faith.
Oof, that's rough. And this wasn't just like a behind closed doors kind of thing. The article says he even told her to get back on the camel and go back to wherever you came from, loud enough for the entire bakery to hear.
And that's where it gets really interesting, because there were other customers in the bakery witnessing all of this. Now, you might think with other people around, someone would step in.
Right, you'd hope so. Someone would say something, do something.
Well, that's the power of this experiment. It perfectly illustrates the bystander effect. This strange phenomenon where the more witnesses there are to a situation, the less likely anyone is to intervene. And the reactions they caught on camera, they ranged from disheartening to inspiring.
So we've got this crowd witnessing a blatant act of discrimination. And most of them just froze.
It's like you'd think someone would at least make eye contact with the woman, offer a sympathetic nod, something. But the footage shows most customers avoiding even looking at her. It's like this invisible wall went up separating them from the situation.
Wow. So not only are they not intervening, but they're actively trying to disengage. That's wild.
It is wild. And the article mentions this chilling detail. At one point, the Muslim woman directly asks another customer to order an apple strudel for her since the clerk refused.
Oh, wow. So she's putting the bystander to the test.
Exactly. And what does the customer do? Gives her the cold shoulder, pretends he doesn't even hear her.
Oh, man. It's like the fear, the awkwardness, the uncertainty of it all just sucks the air right out of the room, and people just shut down.
It's a fascinating psychological phenomenon, really. You see this in all sorts of scenarios, from emergencies to everyday instances of prejudice. That's the bystander effect in action.
Okay, so let's dig into the why here. You've mentioned this term a couple of times, bystander effect, but you've also included some more formal definitions in the materials you sent.
Right, because understanding the dynamics at play is key to breaking free of them. One definition you shared really nails it. The bystander effect is a phenomenon in which the increased presence of witnesses or bystanders during a crisis actually decreases the likelihood that someone will intervene.
So the more people around, the less likely we are to take action. That almost feels counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it? Our brains like to think, surely with more people, someone will do something. But it turns out crowds can create this weird diffusion of responsibility.
Diffusion of responsibility.
Yeah.
Almost like if everyone's potentially responsible, then no one feels like it's actually their job to act.
Spot on. It's like when you're the only one who sees someone drop their wallet, you feel obligated to say something. But if you're in a crowded street, you might think, oh, someone else closer to them will pick it up.
Totally. Or, what if I'm misinterpreting the situation? Maybe they want to drop their wallet. It's easier to justify inaction when you can tell yourself someone else will handle it.
And there's another layer to this. Social pressure. We're wired to care about what others think. So in those ambiguous situations, we look around for cues on how to react.
So it's like if everyone else is just standing here, maybe I shouldn't rock the boat.
Exactly. We start questioning ourselves. What if I misread the situation and make a fool of myself? What if intervening is actually the wrong thing to do? The more people present, the higher that perceived social risk becomes.
It becomes a silent agreement, right? Like
Of
everyone's
course.
thinking, well, I'm not doing anything, so I guess it's fine.
Precisely. It's a social script of inaction.
Right.
And unfortunately, that inaction can have very real consequences.
Okay, so that's the bystander side of things. But let's talk about the flip side, the upstander. You included this powerful definition, and it really resonated with me. An upstander is anyone who recognizes a harmful situation and chooses to intervene. They don't just stand by, they stand up.
And that right there is the key takeaway. We have a choice. We don't have to be passive bystanders swept along by the crowd's inertia. We can choose to be active upstanders.
So what makes someone an upstander? Is it just personality? Are some people hardwired to be braver, more outspoken? Or is it something we can cultivate?
That's a great question. And thankfully, research suggests that anyone can learn to be an upstander. It's about developing awareness, building skills, and having the courage to act even when it feels scary.
So it's not necessarily about being fearless, but about acting even with fear.
Absolutely. Recognizing that our actions, even small ones, can make a difference. Think back to the bakery experiment. Not everyone remains silent. Some customers actually became upstanders.
Right. The article mentions people walking out in protest. There's one quote that really stuck with me, a customer saying, segregating against people, you're a bad American.
Powerful, right. Sometimes being an upstander is about refusing to be complicit. Walking out sends a message. I don't condone this behavior. I'm voting with my feet.
And it's not always about grand gestures. You highlighted this story of a man who was deeply disturbed by the clerk's behavior because his own son had served in Iraq. It felt like a very personal reaction.
Right. He was heartbroken seeing someone treated like an enemy simply because of their faith when his own son had risked his life for his country. He was a powerful example of empathy in action.
And then there were those two young women who didn't hesitate to directly challenge the clerk. They called him out on his behavior, even when he tried to defend himself. They were fearless.
Now, those are your classic upstanders. They didn't just leave, they stayed and challenged the injustice head on. It takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there like that.
Yeah, they didn't back down. The article says they called his behavior offensive and disgusting, which, fair. But it also mentions they didn't stoop to his level. They were assertive, but not aggressive.
Exactly. That's an important nuance. Being an upstander isn't about meeting hostility with hostility. Sometimes a calm, firm voice can be the most effective tool.
So we've seen the bystander effect in action, and we've seen how people can break free from that to become upstanders. But how do we make this practical? How can people listening apply this in their own lives?
Well, you also sent over some information about Stanford University and their work on fostering a culture of upstanding. They've actually developed a model for this, the LIFE model, which I think is brilliant.
A model that sounds right up our alley. Let's hear it.
So LIFE stands for lead, identity, feelings, evaluate. These are the 4 steps to becoming an active upstander.
Okay, break down those steps for us. What does it mean to lead in this context?
Lead is about self-awareness and taking ownership of your role in any given situation. It's about recognizing that you have the power to choose your response.
So before you can even think about intervening, you have to check in with yourself.
Exactly. What are your values? How do they influence your actions? Identity encourages us to consider our own identities and how they relate to the identities of those around us.
Okay, so thinking about our privileges, our biases, how our words and actions might be perceived by others.
You got it. And then comes feelings, which focuses on emotional intelligence. This one's huge, especially in potentially charged situations.
Oh, absolutely. Like if you're feeling angry or scared, that's going to influence how you perceive the situation and how you might react.
Exactly. Feelings encourages us to pause and ask ourselves, okay, what am I feeling right now? How might these emotions be clouding my judgment?
So we've led with self-awareness, considered our identity and its impact, tuned into our feelings. Now, the final step in the LIFE model, evaluate. What does that look like in practice?
Evaluate is where we bring it all together. It's about assessing the situation. What's the context? What are the potential risks? What's the most effective way to intervene?
So sometimes that might mean directly addressing the harmful behavior, but other times it might mean something else.
Exactly. Sometimes the best course of action is seeking help from someone else or simply offering support to the person being targeted.
So the LIFE model isn't just about those big news headline moments of intervention. It's almost like a mental toolkit for navigating those everyday situations where we have a chance to make a difference.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that being an upstander isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. Each situation requires us to tap into those life steps to find the most effective response.
And it strikes me that this could even apply to something like microaggressions. Those subtle, often unintentional comments or actions that still carry a sting of prejudice.
Absolutely. In fact, that's where the life model can be even more impactful. Think about it. Those smaller everyday moments are opportunities to disrupt bias before it escalates.
Okay, so let's say you witness a microaggression. Maybe someone makes an off-color joke or you overhear a stereotype being tossed around. How does the life model guide your response in that scenario?
Well, you'd start with lead, right? Check in with yourself. What are your values? How do you feel about what just happened? Does it align with what you believe?
Right, because if you don't have that internal compass guiding you, it's easy to get swept up in the moment and just let it slide.
Exactly. Then you move to identity. Consider the person who's the target of the microaggression. How might they be experiencing this? What are their identities, and how might those identities be contributing to the situation?
And on the flip side, thinking about your own identities and how they might be influencing your perception of the situation.
Precisely. Feelings comes next. What emotions are bubbling up for you? Anger, discomfort, frustration. Acknowledging those feelings helps you respond thoughtfully instead of reactively.
So you've checked in with yourself, considered the identities at play, and acknowledged your own feelings. Last step, evaluate. This is where you figure out what to do.
Exactly. It might be as simple as saying, hey, that comment didn't sit right with me. Can you see why that might be hurtful? Or it might mean offering support to the person who was targeted, letting them know you're there for them.
And sometimes the best course of action might be to disengage from the situation, especially if you feel unsafe or like it might escalate.
Absolutely. Evaluating doesn't always mean direct confrontation. It's about choosing the most responsible and effective course of action, whatever that may be.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. We've gone from a social experiment and a bakery all the way to practical tools for creating positive change in our everyday lives.
And it all boils down to this. We all have the capacity to be upstanders. It starts with understanding the dynamics of the bystander effect, then choosing to break free from that inertia and act with awareness, empathy, and courage.
Wow, you've given our listeners and all of us a lot to think about. The next time we're in a situation where we have a choice to make, remember that even small actions can create a ripple effect. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Intersections, conversations. Talk is cheap. We have explored key issues in developing better human relations, but it means nothing if you don't do something with our conversations. Race and differences are just obstacle illusions, so do something right where you are. Well, that's it for this intersection conversation, where diversity, equity, and inclusion meet.